Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly, and voila! You get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. Co-hosting with me today are Dwight Brown and Dino Zincarini from Turetsky Consulting. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hey, David.
And we have a very special guest. And I know I say that a lot because we try and find people inside and outside the world of HR technology to talk to us about what's actually happening in the world of HR. But today we actually do have a very special guest, Dave Weisbeck from Visier. For those of you who don't know Dave or don't know Visier, they're a very important company in the world of people analytics, not just because of their market position and because they just got a boatload of money, but because they do a lot of really cool things in the world of people analytics. Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Visier?
Yeah, happy to. My personal background is been in the analytics world for slightly longer than 25 years now. So I've always had a passion and love for data. What we recognize, though, is that there was a whole world of data that we didn't really understand very well. A lot because that data was complicated and it was hard to make sense of. And of course, I'm talking about people data.
Right.
It was really the foundation of Visier, is saying that the questions that we want to ask and answer about people are more complicated than we ask about products and customers and other types of things we analyze. And so we need more innovation, we need more focus, we need better solutions to solve that problem. And so about 11 years ago, we created Visier to try to do exactly that, bring together the world of people data and let people see the truth and create a better future through answering deeper questions on people.
Outstanding. One fun thing you may not know about Dave, and I've tried, I can't say I'm a pioneer in this space, but I've used it a lot, is we both use the internet for lots of different purposes. But one is a fascinating way, and actually very early in the world of the internet, right, Dave?
Yeah. So I actually met my wife on the internet, which, okay, that's pretty common nowadays.
Right.
There's enough applications out there, online datings, I would say in the mainstream. And so the real key to what makes this somewhat unique is I met my wife on the internet in 1995.
Wow.
Which, to put that in perspective, Google was founded in 1998.
Wow.
So I couldn't search for her.
Right.
But if you're old enough, you'll remember pen pals as a thing people used to do to find out about experiences from people around the world. In the early days of the internet, they tried to create something similar, and it was such a forum where I met my wife.
Weren't we calling those things bulletin boards back then?
There was bulletin boards, but also just like the chat forums or discussion forums. They were very clunky. You type, you hit the button, and like 30 seconds later, it refreshed with a response. It's not quite the real-time messaging we expect of today.
And definitely not as mobile.
No, definitely not mobile.
So you're an early pioneer for Match or Plenty of Fish or eHarmony.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm a model for all those organizations of how to do it right.
The success story. Yeah, that's excellent. So today, what we're going to talk to Dave about are some of the really incredible issues around the challenges facing organizations in 2021. First question for you, Dave, is there's been a lot of talk about what's been called the Great Resignation. What exactly is that? And should companies actually be worried about this?
I think definitely companies should be very worried. So that's the easy part of the answer. What is the Great Resignation? So I would describe it, since I come from the world of analytics, I have to go into some numbers and start there. And there's a wonderful report that is produced regularly by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's called the JOLT data, so the job openings, leads, turnover. So they try to track what's happening in the movement of labor across the US. And when you look at that data, one of the wonderful things about that data is it not only gives you a modern view, it gives you the trend line of what's happened for the last 30 years. And when you see consistent patterns in that data, so if we go back to 2008 and we look at what happened with what I lovingly refer to as the finance apocalypse. So, that was a housing crisis, financial world kind of had challenges.
Right.
People hunker down in their jobs when that happens. And so the amount of resignations, people leaving organizations, fell to kind of historic low levels. And it's been increasing since then. And then what happened recently, of course, with COVID, a ton of uncertainty, people hunkered down again. But now that we're coming to the tail end, world's opening, what are we seeing? Everybody's decided that now's a great time for change. And so regardless of the reasons why, that's a great conversation of its own right. The data shows that we're at a historic 30-year high in people leaving organizations. And so that's where I would say the name comes from, the Great Resignation, is that we're at a 30-year peak. We were at historic levels. We've never seen this before.
I mean, there have been times in the past when people have worried about the problem with the lack of knowledge workers, or the loss of knowledge workers, or people who had intellectual property walking out the door. There have been lots of times when we've had lots of discussions about how do you keep those people? Is there the same type of thought process going on right now about how do we keep these people? Is it a question of the remote work? Is it a question of the way in which people thought they were treated during the crisis? What do we attribute this, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, there's this notion of a perfect storm. There's even a nice movie about it, right? That you get a confluence of events, to put it fancy language. And I think that actually, when we get to these historic moments, I think that's often the case, that we're in a place, a time, where a whole bunch of factors are coming together. So when the economy is doing quite well, people tend to leave organizations at higher rates. The economy is actually doing quite well despite the pandemic. When people have a natural cycle to leave organizations, there's a certain amount of tenure you build up, and then you look for the new experience. When people pause that out, what can happen is we get it's the snake swallowing the large animal. It's a balloon working its way through the system.
Right.
And so we get a bit of that effect. But I think one of the unique new ones that we don't have a way to think about historically is the work-life balance, the remote, do I really want to get back in the car for my 2 to 3 hour round trip commute? Do I want that experience? Do I want to go back to that?
Right.
I think there's even another factor to think about as well, which is a bit of disenfranchisement, fancy word, but basically looking at particularly minorities, saying, I've been losing out and I'm not certain I want to participate. And so, trying to decode as well in some of the data, whether people are leaving for new opportunities or leaving the workforce entirely. And so I think it's a whole bunch of these things coming together that compound on each other, which leads us to the Great Resignation.
And Dave, this is an interesting one. Well, like everything's interesting, but in particular for me, because turnover is sort of the first use case, or the most compelling use case for people analytics. We've been measuring turnover forever. We've been talking about understanding turnover, it seems, forever. Is there something different and unique about this moment that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, I actually a pretty common conversation I have is, Visier, we have some great technology that relates to trying to predict turnover. For example, we can say who has a higher propensity to leave. We have a number of ways that we can help organizations. And a pretty common conversation is even around the idea that some of the historical things that we can't look at anymore because it's such a unique point in time. So what happened last year is not, you can't look at it and go, let's compare that to this year, because last year was such an anomaly. And so I think that's part of the answer to your question is we're seeing patterns we've never seen before, and I think we're also seeing people being driven by choices they never thought about before, that they didn't like remote work as an easy example of that. I have this wonderful phrase I learned in biology of all places. It's called punctuated equilibrium. What does that mean? It's a fancy term. And it's a really simple idea. Change happens really slow until all of a sudden it doesn't. There's like something smashes the system. Remote work has been something that has been slowly coming in and increasing over time, very slowly. Now suddenly we had a crash to the system. We were all remote for a while, as long as the work could be done remotely. And now people have realized, hey, we can actually be productive. It's actually a better work environment for many. For some, it's worse, let's be fair. And so I now am contemplating things I wouldn't have contemplated. If my employer won't allow for remote work, maybe I look at a different employer who will, because it allowed me to manage work and life better. Because I didn't lose, again, those 3 hours stuck on whatever freeway is your local freeway of choice.
Well, I think that brings us to our next topic, which is the world of hybrid work and burnout, actually, which is that when we think about returning to the office and we think about the decisions that not only as good consumers, but also as good employees/employers, how do we possibly make those decisions and not disenfranchise a bunch and not destroy our productivity? What's the linchpin here? What's the data showing about what are the right decisions and what are the right answers? And what are even the right questions about hybrid work and bringing people back?
What I love about the Workforce Agility Limited Series by Cornerstone was we talked to executives and customers all about skills. Skills. Cornerstone has a wonderful background in learning and development, training, etc. Their LMS is world-class, but they've centered the business now, not just on that, like building upon that, but building upon how everything is moved to the skills economy. So check out the limited series called Workforce Agility, and you can get it wherever you get your podcast. And it's just a wonderful series where we talk to their executives on the shift of why, and also their customers that are using it. So check it out whenever you get a chance. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a rich tapestry. Another one of my favorite expressions. It's a complicated topic. I think if you boil it all down, what is the single greatest question that people are asking? Productivity. If we can be just as productive, why not? And so then what do people throw into the mix around productivity? So I don't know, I probably it's definitely north of 50, leaders and organizations I've talked to about this topic in the last probably even 6 months, let alone a year, asking what it is they are seeing. Did they see productivity fall, rise, stay the same? And I'd say the broad consensus is largely it stayed the same. There may have been, even in the early days, a little bit of uptick in productivity, but most people put that in the bucket of like, there's a sense of camaraderie of that we've got. Plus, all of the fun parts, trappings of life, we couldn't do anymore. We couldn't go to concerts, right. We couldn't go to bars, we couldn't do any of that stuff. And so there's maybe a small uptick, but in net, probably even in terms of productivity. But then people throw in, what are the benefits of the water cooler? It's the shorthand for like the network effects that we get from the hallway conversations, the water cooler conversations. What about losing those? What about those people as well that are in one bedroom apartments and they just don't have a place and a space, so they can't be productive? And then, of course, there's a whole classes of work that can't be done remotely. So you throw all of that into the mix. But the one that also comes up fairly consistently is this notion of a trust. That if I can't look across the floor and see people busily working, do I trust that the work is being done? And that's the one that I think is the big trap. Because ultimately, the right way to do this, as we've known for a very long time, is to focus on outcomes, not tasks. And that, goes all to the nature of modern work and the way work is done. But there's still, you see it most often in places where there is a low trust, where they say, hey, we need to break from this and look at bringing everybody back to the office. And I think most of the burnout pieces, all of the other trappings of life that we have aging parents, we have young children, all of those things, people I think also realized that remote work can either be a big positive or a big negative to that. And so I don't think there's one consistent answer, that they took on more work or they're able to see how they could manage that better because they are just close and near to where that work needs to be done.
Well, this is definitely a multivariate equation. And it is going to be very different for the different types of industries that you're talking about. Some industries cannot work remotely. Some industries have some functions that actually can and would probably be better off being remote. But I think, and as a leader yourself, you've probably gone through this math about the renting really big real estate versus the revolution and evolution of remote work and the technologies needed to support it. There's got to be some kind of meeting in the minds on the employer side. But then, the other part of this equation is not only the results, and you were mentioning it just a little while ago, the personal issues that people have to deal with on the personal side. Because we've all taken economics, and it's 24 hours in the day is equal to leisure plus work, right? It's 24 equals L plus W. There is no other. I mean, you can add a lot of other factors in there, but that's it. There's only 24 hours in a day. And solving for the W or solving for the L, we both have to optimize both.
Yep.
Working remotely is no different than when you commuted to the office. It's just different ways of being able to manage W and L, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think there's another factor as well that people forget too often in the equation here, as you're thinking about from the employer side of the fence, which is your talent pool.
Right.
Did it just grow by 10 times? I don't know, maybe more like 20 times. So most employees were hired, within a, call it an hour radius, maybe 2 hour radius if you're unfortunate to have a long commute of the office. So now how big is your talent pool? Right. And what is the benefit of that? And so that's where it's a very complicated equation to solve for. And then on the employee side, I mean, even if speaking personally, I have eaten healthier, much healthier. My office life was, go out to the whatever local shop,
right,
which was never quite healthy food.
Right.
So there's these little small conveniences of, the kitchen's not that far away. For some, that's a negative because the kitchen's not that far away. So
right.
There's no one answer for everyone.
Absolutely. The one thing I wanted to ask you with and end with was, as a human, my hope is, because you were talking about the revolution and evolution of how the pandemic has changed things, we're now in a global world. We can actually find gig economy workers around the world using things like Fiverr and Workmarket and be able to pick people up relatively inexpensively and get a lot of great work done. And I can work for organizations around the world relatively easily and with very little transaction costs, much, much better than I ever could before. So to your point, as a human, now the borders have really kind of opened up for us. As long as the productivity is there and we get paid from the results of our labor is there.
Yeah, and so the idea that the talent pool now is very global. The talent pool has been global for some time, but it was kind of compartmentalized. We could produce a thing here, we could ideate a thing here, but now teams themselves, so we've narrowed what we can do. So that's which expands the opportunities. So we narrowed the work, expand the opportunity, and so that means we've got access to a whole host of talent we didn't. But again, to this idea that we've had this big change hit us all at once, it forced us also to hone the communications and collaboration tools. And so we even saw, there was winners and losers by an industry perspective with the pandemic. Certainly hospitality, everybody can understand. But a lot of technology was actually a winner when it was any sort of communication collaboration platforms. And so now we've made those investments and put those in places which can hold the line on that productivity. And I've seen, even in my personal experience, little things where when you have a big center of gravity for an organization, there's one city, which is your headquarters, and most employees are there, and some portion of your workforce is remote, often, on the sales side. Very common way organizations are structured. The remote people never quite feel attached.
Right.
Because you're in a meeting and there's 8 people in the room and 2 people remote, and those 2 people can't really participate.
Sure.
But now all 10 can participate because we've solved we're all remote, or we've solved some of the communication gaps. So there's all these little benefits as well that are coming in, or infrastructure or platforms we put in place that also are helping us to be more global and thinking about the talent that we can provide. We still haven't solved basic problems like time zones still matter.
Right.
I don't think we really have a solution to that problem. I don't think tech will solve that one, not anytime soon, at least. But 3 hours we can manage. Time zone differences. So it's still, if nothing else, it's still a 10 or 20x improvement in the amount of talent that we have available.
Right.
I'm curious, Dave, what you think about how companies use analytics, because it's not new, right? We've been using people analytics for a long time. We've been building them for a long time. And what you were saying earlier is interesting in that we described a unprecedented event, a change, which at the same time and very rapidly changed both the demand side of labor and the supply side. The nature of work has changed per the whole remote work option. So suddenly there's a lot of flux in this labor market. Is the way we use people analytics, does that need a dusting off? For example, I see a lot of companies that think achieving a people analytics deployment means I've got a dashboard, right? I put my metrics up, the dashboard's there, the executives can look at it. Once a quarter, they go through their KPIs. We've achieved people analytics. Or is there something more here? What are your thoughts in how we do it? And even if a company already has people analytics, given what we were saying about this monumental change, do they have to dust off perhaps how they're using it?
Yeah, so I'm fond of pointing out to people that everybody does analytics. So the only question is how well you do it. And I think that's a lot of the heart of what you're relating there, is that the producing the headcount report, just showing a breakdown of turnover of which departments, which regions, things like that. It doesn't give you something that's actionable. And I think that's the key of what people really need to be fixated on. I used to relate this in terms of remember when we used to travel? Remember those good old days? Very common in your hotel, you get, a copy of USA Today, which slide under the door, and there's only in the bottom left corner some, interesting factoid. And I used to always relate that that's interesting, but it's not actionable. And you always have to think about analytics in that vein. Is it interesting information? Is it actionable information? And go seek the actionable. I can make a decision. I can change something. And as it relates to the Great Resignation, there are real actions that you can take. You're right. There's this upheaval in the market that gives you opportunities to acquire talent, because now we have an influx of skills coming into the market. We have an opportunity to look internally in internal marketplaces for talent, and so developing people. Learning is going crazy right now because people are looking to skill and reskill, and then of course retaining, understanding why. Why are people leaving your organization is a question. If you can answer it, you can take action. Who left? Yeah, okay, put it in the history book. I don't have a time machine. I can't change it, but if I can figure out why people are leaving, I put in programs that change that. So a lot of people leave for career advancement. Do I need to look at my own compensation and promotion cycles, opportunities for advancement? Can I go after that problem and actually make a material benefit to retaining people? That is a really simple straight line you can draw from understanding why people are leaving to putting in a program that can change it.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by Turetsky Consulting and listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
And I think that brings us to our next topic, which is talking about diversity and talking about how we measure it, talking about what we can do about it. And with some of the new SEC regulations and some new regulations that are actually coming out of the U.S. Congress about the mandatory reporting of material metrics in the people world, the people analytics. Dave, what are we seeing in terms of being able to report on substantive or substantial diversity metrics and what companies are doing about them?
Yeah, I actually find this very fascinating that a lot of the focus for a tip of the spear to create change is coming through the investor world. We're thinking SEC, NASDAQ as well has looked at some of these reporting. And so it's fascinating to me that it is coming from the world that we can most easily be cynical about. Just all about the money, right? Who cares? It's all about the money and, return on shareholder, or
Sure.
shareholder returns. And so, but I think that what that also tells us is something about two things really. One is there's a tremendous amount of research that shows more diverse boards, more diverse leadership teams outperform less. And I've always had a simple way to justify that for those who needed a logical argument. If you don't look like your customers, it's hard to relate to your customers. And so your leadership team should reflect, the grand melting pot.
Right.
And so I think that, that's one side of it. And I think the other side of it is transparency is one of the greatest ways to create change. You manage what you measure. And if we don't measure this, we won't manage it. We won't improve it. We won't make real change. And that's one of the other powers of analytics is it tells you what matters because you measure what matters. And so if this matters to us, we'll measure it. And one of the things that we've always, we live in a capitalist society, there's no apologies for that. We do.
Right.
And so the pinnacle of the capitalist world, the investor world, if that is telling us this matters, that's a great thing because that'll help all of us to put time, attention, and to make real change.
And one would hope that with these SEC regulations, that companies are going to do the right thing, tell us real issues, real data, real problems, and how they're going to solve them. So to your point, we can vote with our feet. We can vote with our dollars or whatever unit of measurement we want to use and say, I don't want to invest in companies that are not like me or have thoughts like me, or that are treating people the way I hope they're treating people, just in the exact same way we did that with their environmental disclosures, their carbon footprint disclosures, their sustainability disclosures, however you want to put it. So hopefully what companies are going to do are start to foment what are the right things to tell the audience, which is the market, and the market will be smart about what they're hearing and to your point, be able to vote with their dollars.
Yeah, and I think it'll give us more individual choice when it relates to, I spend my hard-earned dollars in whatever the store happens to be, the grocery store, the car lot, wherever it is. It'll give me some more agency there, which is always good. But it also give us the ability to the idea that, the data and more transparency is good. It also give us a view to look across. Where's the outliers? We'll start to be able to see them by industry. We'll start to see them by looking at, is there patterns of what really great companies are doing, the patterns of not so great companies are doing. And so it'll give us not only the individual view and some agency, it also give us the bigger picture view and it'll help to fill that in. And I think the other thing it'll also help us to do is diversity in some sense is the easy one. And what I mean by that is we mostly think about diversity in statistics and counting and math. What is the ratio? How many of? The hard one's inclusion.
Right.
But I've always seen it as inclusion is a bit more of the outcome, the real prize that we're shooting for. But diversity is the place to get started. And so I think what we also see here is the faster we get through the diversity problem, the faster we can start to take on the inclusion problem. And so it gives us that starting block, out of the starting block rather, kind of focus that I think we need to start to get to the tougher problems.
We had a Harvard researcher on, a Harvard fellow, and she was talking about the problem of diversity and inclusion, and she really double clicked on the nature of inclusion and what it means, and trying to figure out how do you change real behaviors about how do you promote people, how do you give them opportunity for advancement, how do you give them opportunity for overtime and for hours worked. We have to start measuring it and bring it to light, and then be able to train people on how to actually utilize it and the data to show the patterns and be able to prove to ourselves that either something's going right or something's going wrong. And then how do we change those behaviors to make them different and to cause impact?
Yeah, actually, I have a lot of fun debates with Lexi Martin, who should be a very familiar name to
Sure.
most. I mean, she's an icon in the people analytics, but even just the larger HR or HCM space. And so we have fun debates, trying to figure out the truth of these many complicated topics. And inclusion's one we have quite a bit of discussion about. A lot of times, inclusion is looked at as a feeling of belonging. It's at the very least, its feeling is a key piece. If I feel like I'm included, then I'm included. And the obvious point that both of us go to is, well, how do you measure that? And so there are many of these things that we try to measure in the world that we can't directly measure. For all two people listening who are fans of quantum mechanics, it's a bit Heisenberg principle. Shout out to those two people. So there's certain things we really can't measure. So we have to look for proxy measures, things that we can start to look at. And so in inclusion, we start to think about, can we start to get to some basic things like looking at meeting participations? Promotions, sure, we can go there more directly. We can look at, spans and layers in organizations and, understand participation. But can we go to some more seemingly mundane, but actually might be more powerful things to measure in the organization, that they're included in the conversations that matter, which leads to the obvious question of, well, how do you figure out what are the conversations that matter? But there's a lot of decisions and a lot of ways decisions are made in organizations that don't always just follow this straightforward organizational structure that, people build personal networks. How do you start to decode some of that and find out who's in those networks and how diverse are those networks? And so we would talk about it in more cliched forms of like, the old boys network or something like that, right?
Right.
And we can all go to our country club or wherever they went. But there are modern, less easy to see versions of that. So can we start to introspect those and understand, is there a network that is leveraged for decision making, and is it inclusive or is it not? So it's a fascinating place, and I think there'll be tons more research and tons more innovation done to try to really unpack inclusivity.
And I think we could actually have an entire podcast on O&A and D&I with O&A, and how you could talk about the circles and talk about the inclusivity of those circles and what it shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the way modern work is done. It's in these virtual networks more often than just the team structures, the organizational top-down team structures. Right. And so, trying to measure those is just in itself is ripe for a lot of innovation.
Absolutely. So Dave, we had a lot of really passionate conversation today around a lot of the challenges facing organizations when it comes to people in 2021. We talked about the Great Resignation, what it is and how to deal with it, or how to at least approach it. We talked about hybrid work and what's actually happening with people either coming back to the office, and then how do they deal with the personal side. And then we talked about some of the new ways that the SEC is requiring mandatory disclosures and how that's impacting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any other thoughts that you had before we close today?
Yeah, maybe a couple. The first one that comes to mind is, I think there's a sense that people have that resignations and people leaving there's not much you can do about it. The data, the science says no, you can. And there's more opportunity than people believe. yes, we can spin up more recruiting. Yes, we can look at, providing more opportunity for internal people, but we can also get ahead of the real reasons that people are leaving. The data can hold out truths that we wouldn't otherwise understand or know, and we can change the answers. I think what also goes with that is people underestimate the cost of people leaving. The replacement cost is a simple number that gets thrown around a lot. It's pretty easy to defend. It's going to cost you about 1.5 times the base salary of somebody to replace them. And so it is an urgent problem. It's not the Great Resignation is not just something that we'll put in some history book and we're done. It's an urgent problem today that is real impactful to the success of a business. So it's also a way the HR team can make a real difference to the top and bottom line of an organization. And I think it also connects, last point, it connects to what we discussed around diversity. Because I think that notion of disenfranchising experiences that minorities, women have in the workforce, I think women in particular are hit harder from COVID because they took more of the work-life balance they had to take on both sides.
Right.
That's also impactful. And so what's happening from the investor community is a good start, but we all have to contribute.
Absolutely. Do you know any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still reflecting on the discussion how this crisis is unique and unprecedented. Our previous data may not help us understand neither how we got into it, how we managed through it, and most importantly, how we get out of it. And so for those of us who are data nerds and people analytics nerds, this is an opportunity to, as Dave was saying, really revisit what we've got out there and ask the question, is this actionable? Can my business partners take this and use it for something tangible? And if the answer is maybe, then I need to do more work. I need to think about how do I tie this to some of the things we're seeing happening or anticipating happening so that I can help my organization put this stuff to work.
Outstanding. Dwight, anything?
I think we're really in a fascinating time, and I think that this highlights that fact, the Great Resignation, what's going on there, and this idea of hybrid work. And like Dave said, we just went through a period that put that in fast forward, even though it was already in motion,
sure,
but a more slow pace. And so this is a fascinating conversation around that. It's a really exciting time, a very fascinating time, and gives us a lot of opportunities from an analytics perspective to help to start to explain what's happening, what are we seeing, and what can we do about things that we feel we need to do something about. So certainly appreciate having you here, Dave.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Dave, for coming and sharing your thoughts.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. It was my pleasure.
Our pleasure as well. And hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon.
Looking forward to it.
Great. And thank you, Dino, and thank you, Dwight.
Thanks, David.
Anytime.
And thank you for listening. And if you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. And if you know somebody who might find it interesting, please send it off to them. And thank you very much. Take care and stay safe.
That was HR Data Labs. Please visit turetskyconsulting.com/podcast to review the show, add comments about this episode, or add new ideas about upcoming shows you'd like to hear. Feel free to be creative, but please be nice. Thank you for joining us this week on the HR Data Labs podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.